My name is Doris Fletcher, and I'm 53 years old. I was standing in my kitchen, staring at my phone like it was a live grenade. It just hung up after the most explosive argument of my life, and my hands were still trembling. My son Gerald, my only child, the boy I raised alone for 23 years, had just screamed at me to sign over my house to his wife's family. Not to him. To them. People I barely knew. My heart was hammering so hard I thought I might pass up right there on the linoleum floor I'd scrubbed 1,000 times. Tears were threatening to spill, but I blinked them back. One question kept circling my mind like a vulture. I raised him alone for 23 years. How did I raise a stranger? Before we dive into what happened next, I'd love to know where you're watching from. Drop your city or country in the comments below. And if you've ever dealt with family drama that made you question everything, hit that like button so I know I'm not alone. Make sure to subscribe because this story gets wild. And trust me, you'll want to hear how I fought back. Now let me take you back to where it all began. My life before this nightmare felt simple, hard-earned, but mine. I became a widow at 30 when my husband died in a construction accident. Gerald was only 7 years old then, still small enough to crawl into my lap when the world felt too big. After the funeral, after the casseroles stopped coming and the sympathy cards stopped filling the mailbox, it was just the two of us against everything. I worked 2 jobs to keep us afloat. During the day, I waited tables at Mel's Diner on Route 44, smiling through sore feet and rude customers. At night, I cleaned office buildings downtown, pushing a vacuum through empty cubicles while the city slept. Every paycheck got split carefully. Rent, groceries, Gerald's school supplies, and a little bit, just a tiny bit, into my savings account. For 15 years, I saved. 15 years of double shifts and skipped meals and wearing the same winter coat until the lining fell apart. I had one dream. I wanted to own a house. Not just any house, but a real home where Gerald could grow up safe, where I could stop worrying about landlords raising the rent or selling the building out from under us. When I finally had enough for a down payment, I cried in the bank parking lot. The modest 3-bedroom house in Springfield wasn't fancy, but it was mine. The mortgage was steep, but I'd done the math 100 times. I could make it work. That house became everything to me. It was my pride, my security, my sacrifice embodied in brick and wood, and a little front porch where I could sit on summer evenings. Gerald grew up in that house. He graduated high school in that living room, wearing his cap and gown while I took 100 pictures. He went to community college and then got his accounting degree. I was so proud when he landed a good job at a firm downtown. He was responsible, smart, kind. At least, that's who I thought he was. 2 years ago, he married Bethany. She seemed nice enough at first, pretty and polite, though something about her smile never quite reached her eyes. But I pushed those doubts away because Gerald loved her, and I wanted him to be happy. At their wedding, I met Bethany's family for the first time. Her mother Glenda, her father Vernon, and her brother Lyle. All 3 of them lived together in a rental apartment across town. During the reception, Glenda made a comment that stuck with me. Shed had a few glasses of champagne and was walking through the venue with this appraising look on her face. She turned to me and said, "Must be nice having that big house all to yourself, Doris. So much space for just one person." I laughed it off, said something polite about how the house was just right for me. But Vernon, Bethany's father, wouldn't let it go. He started asking questions about the property value, how much my mortgage payment was, whether I'd thought about downsizing. I felt uncomfortable but told myself he was just making conversation. Lyle, the brother, didn't say much. Just watched me with this calculating expression that made my skin crawl. The first 6 months after the wedding were relatively normal. Gerald and Bethany lived in their own apartment about 20 minutes away. We had regular family dinners at my house, usually on Sundays. I'd cook a big meal, set the table nice, and we'd sit around talking about work and life and plans for the future. But somewhere around month 3, things started to shift. Bethany's family started inviting themselves to these dinners. At first, it was just Glenda. Then Vernon started coming too, then Lyle. Soon, every Sunday dinner included all 5 of them. I didn't mind at first. I figured they were just close, and I wanted to be welcoming. But Glenda had this habit of walking through my house like she was touring a museum. She'd touch the furniture, peer into closets, make little comments under her breath. Vernon would ask intrusive questions about my retirement plans, whether I'd thought about what would happen to the house when I got older, if I had a will. Lyle would wander into the spare bedrooms and comment on how much wasted space there was, how these rooms just sat empty while people like them struggled to make rent. I started to feel violated in my own home, but I didn't want to cause problems. Gerald seemed happy, and I didn't want to be the difficult mother-in-law. Then Gerald started changing. He began canceling our one-on-one coffee dates, the ones Wed had every other Saturday for years. When we did manage to meet up, Bethany always came along. She'd steer the conversation, interrupt when Gerald and I were talking about old memories, change the subject whenever I asked how he was really doing. Gerald started making comments that felt like little needles. "Mom, you really don't need all that space," he'd say out of nowhere. "Bethany's family is really struggling with their rent going up again." Then he'd look at me expectantly, like I was supposed to offer something. "Family helps family, right?" he said one day. And the way he said it felt like a test. The tension kept building. I tried to help in the way I knew how. I offered them $500 toward Bethany's family's rent 1 month. I thought it was generous, more than I could really afford, but I wanted to show I cared. Bethany refused immediately. "We don't need charity, Doris," she said, her voice cold. "We need stability." Gerald nodded along, supporting his wife, but he wouldn't look at me. That's when I first felt it. That ice forming between us. My son, my baby boy who used to tell me everything, had become a stranger who looked at me like I was the problem. I went home that night and cried, but I didn't understand why. Not yet. 3 weeks after the money incident, Gerald called me on a Tuesday afternoon. His voice was cheerful, almost too cheerful, like he was reading from a script. "Mom, we need to have an important family dinner. Can you host this Friday?" I felt a flutter of hope. Maybe this was it. Maybe we'd clear the air and get back to normal. I said yes immediately and spent the next 3 days preparing. I cleaned the house until it sparkled. I bought groceries I couldn't really afford. I cooked Gerald's absolute favorite meal, the one I used to make for his birthday every year. Pot roast with carrots and potatoes, homemade rolls, green beans with almonds, and apple pie for dessert. I set the dining room table with my good dishes, the ones I'd inherited from my mother. Friday evening came, and I was ready an hour early. I expected just Gerald and Bethany. When the doorbell rang at 6 o'clock sharp, I opened it with a smile. My smile died when I saw all 5 of them standing on my porch, Gerald and Bethany in front, and behind them, Glenda, Vernon, and Lyle. They were all dressed up like they were going somewhere important. Vernon was carrying a leather folder under his arm. My stomach dropped, but I plastered the smile back on and welcomed them in. What else could I do? Dinner was strained. Everyone complimented the food, but the conversation felt forced and strange. Glenda kept exchanging glances with Vernon. Lyle barely spoke, just watched me the whole time like I was a problem he was trying to solve. Gerald wouldn't meet my eyes. After we finished eating, after Eid served the pie and poured the coffee, Vernon cleared his throat. It was a deliberate sound, a signal. Everyone stopped talking and turned to look at me. My heart started racing. Vernon opened his leather folder and pulled out several printed documents. He spread them across my dining room table like he was making a business presentation. "Doris," he began, his voice taking on this practiced tone. "We've been doing some research." He showed me rental market analysis, charts about the housing crisis, statistics about how hard it was for families to find affordable places to live. I sat there, confused, wondering what this had to do with anything. Then Glenda leaned forward and put her hand over mine. Her palm was cold and dry. "We've been praying about this situation," she said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "And God showed us the answer." Bethany nodded along, her eyes starting to well up with tears. "Your house has 4 bedrooms, Doris. You only use 1. It hit me then, what they were about to ask. My whole body went rigid. Vernon continued like he was making the most reasonable suggestion in the world. "They wanted me to share my house. Not just have them visit, not just help them find a place. They wanted Bethany's entire family to move into my home. Vernon and Glenda would take the master guest room. Lyle would take the smaller guest room. They'd help with expenses. though Vernon's explanation of what that meant was vague and non-committal. They presented it as this trendy idea, multi-generational living, very popular these days. Vernon even said, "You're getting older, Doris. You'll need help soon anyway. This way, we're all here." I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach. I looked at Gerald, waiting for him to say something, to tell them this was crazy. But he just sat there, staring at his coffee cup. I tried to find my voice. When I finally spoke, it came out shaky. "This is my home. This is my private space. I'm not ready for that." I tried to be polite, diplomatic. I explained that I valued my independence, that I'd worked so hard for this house that I wasn't comfortable with the idea. I thought they'd understand, maybe be a little embarrassed for asking. Instead, Gerald's face turned red. Bethany started crying, real tears running down her face. "I knew it," she sobbed. "I knew she didn't really accept me into the family. Gerald, I told you she'd say no." Glenda's face hardened. "After all those Sunday dinners we shared, Doris, after we welcomed you into our family, I really thought you cared about us." Vernon shook his head sadly, like I'd disappointed him deeply. The guilt crashed over me like a wave. They were making me feel like a monster for saying no to something completely unreasonable. They started gathering their things, making a big show of leaving. Bethany was sobbing dramatically, leaning on her mother. Lyle gave me this disgusted look as he walked past. Gerald stood by the door, his jaw clenched. He finally looked at me, and his eyes were full of something I'd never seen before. Anger. Cold, hard anger directed at his own mother. "Mom," he said quietly, "I'm really disappointed in you. I thought you were better than this." Then they all left. And I was standing alone in my dining room, surrounded by dirty dishes and the ruins of what I'd thought would be a nice family dinner. I didn't sleep that night. I kept replaying the conversation, wondering if it'd been too harsh, if it'd misunderstood. Maybe they really were struggling. Maybe I was being selfish. I had this big house, and they needed help. By 3 a.m, I was seriously doubting myself. I called my friend Irene, woke her up, and told her everything. There was a long silence after I finished. Then Irene said, very firmly, "Doris Fletcher, don't you dare give up your house. What they asked is insane. You worked your whole life for that house. It's yours. Don't let them guilt you into giving up your security." Her words helped, but the doubt still gnawed at me. The next morning, I tried calling Gerald. It went straight to voicemail. I sent a text message asking if we could talk. It showed as read, but he didn't respond. Days passed. Then a week. Then 2 weeks. Every call went to voicemail. Every text was left unread. It was like I'd ceased to exist. I'd never gone more than a few days without talking to my son, and now it had been 2 weeks of absolute silence. The worry was eating me alive. I didn't know if I should be angry or scared or sad. I felt all three at once. After 2 weeks, I couldn't take it anymore. I drove to Gerald and Bethany's apartment one Tuesday evening. I knew they'd be home because Gerald always got off work at 5:30. I knocked on the door. No answer. I knocked again. Still nothing. But I could see their cars in the parking lot, and I could hear the television through the door. They were home. They were just refusing to answer. I stood there for 10 minutes, knocking periodically, feeling like a fool. Finally, an elderly neighbor opened her door and looked at me sympathetically. "Honey," she said, "they're not going to answer. I've seen them peeking through the curtains." I left feeling humiliated and heartbroken. Then my niece Stephanie called me. She's my late sister's daughter, lives 2 states away, and we keep in touch mostly through social media. "Aunt Doris," she said, her voice careful, "I need to tell you something, and you're not going to like it." She sent me screenshots from Bethany's social media accounts. I didn't use those platforms much. Didn't understand the appeal. But what I saw made my blood run cold. Bethany had posted several vague but pointed messages. "When your husband's mother cares more about material things than family unity." Read one. "Some people would rather see family homeless than share their blessings," said another. The comments underneath were vicious. Bethany's friends, people I'd never met, were attacking an unnamed selfish mother-in-law. Some suggested elder abuse. Others said the mother-in-law should be ashamed. The social media attack was bad enough. But what happened at church was worse. Gerald and I had attended the same church for 15 years, ever since we moved to Springfield. It was my community, my support system. The Sunday after Stephanie called me, I walked into church and immediately felt the coldness. Women I'd served on committees with for years suddenly had somewhere else to be when I approached. During coffee hour, I overheard bits of conversation. Whispers about how some people have more than they need but want help family in crisis. About how elderly folks can become selfish and set in their ways. I finally cornered my friend Martha and asked what was going on. She looked uncomfortable. Doris, there's been talk. Glenda has been coming to the women's Bible study. She's been sharing about her family's housing struggles and how they asked a family member for help and got turned away. Martha hesitated. She made it sound like they're about to be evicted, and you refused to let them stay with you even temporarily. I felt sick. It was all lies. They weren't being evicted. They wanted to take over my house permanently. But Glenda had spun the story to make me look like a heartless monster. Even Pastor Reynolds called me into his office. He was kind but firm. Doris, I wanted to talk to you about Christian duty to family. I've been hearing some concerning things. I explained the full truth. I told him they didn't want temporary help. They wanted me to give them my house. They wanted to move in permanently and take control of my home. Pastor Reynolds' expression changed completely. His face went from concerned to shocked. That's not what I was told at all, he said quietly. Glenda said you refused to let them stay even for a few weeks while they looked for a new place after an eviction notice. He apologized, said had been manipulated, and promised to pray for wisdom for everyone involved. But the damage was done. My reputation in my own church community had been poisoned. That afternoon, I had my first real breakdown. I sat in the church parking lot and cried until I couldn't breathe. My son was turning everyone against me. My reputation was being destroyed. People I'd known for years thought I was cruel and selfish. All because I wouldn't give up my house. My friend Irene found me there, pulled me out of my car, and took me to a coffee shop. This is emotional terrorism, she said bluntly. They're trying to break you down until you give in. You have to stand your ground, Doris. If you cave now, you'll lose everything, and they still won't respect you. 3 weeks of silence turned into a phone call from Gerald. My heart leaped when I saw his name on the screen. I answered breathlessly. Gerald, honey, I'm so glad you called. There was a pause. Mom, have you reconsidered? His voice was cold, businesslike. Not the voice of my son. I tried to talk to him about our relationship, about how much his silence had hurt me, about how we needed to work through this. He cut me off. That's not what I called about. Have you reconsidered giving Bethany's family a place to live? I said no, my voice breaking. I tried to explain again why this was unfair, why I couldn't do what they were asking. Gerald sighed. Then we don't have anything to talk about. He hung up. I stared at the phone, and something inside me cracked. It was 2 a.m. when my phone rang. I jolted awake, heart already racing because middle-of-the-night calls are never good news. I grabbed my phone and saw Bethany's name. Hello, I answered, my voice thick with sleep. Bethany was sobbing hysterically on the other end. Doris, it's Gerald. She gasped between sobs. Hess in the hospital. There was an accident. They're saying he needs surgery. Hess asking for you. The world tilted. My baby was hurt. Nothing else mattered. Which hospital? I asked, already scrambling out of bed. Memorial. Please hurry. She hung up. I threw on clothes over my pajamas, grabbed my purse and keys, and ran to my car. The 45-minute drive to Memorial Hospital felt like hours. I prayed the whole way, begging God to let Gerald be okay. I didn't care about the house, about the arguments, about any of it. I just needed my son to be alive. I parked haphazardly in the emergency lot and ran inside. The woman at the desk looked confused when I asked about Gerald Fletcher. She checked her computer. We have a Gerald Fletcher checked in, but he's not in the emergency department or surgery. She gave me a room number in the general waiting area. I took the elevator up, my hands shaking so badly I could barely press the button. When the doors opened, I rushed down the hallway, looking for the right room number. I found it and pushed through the door. Gerald was sitting in a chair. Not on a gurney, not hooked up to machines, not injured at all. He was sitting in a waiting room chair, completely fine. Bethany was next to him. And so were Glenda, Vernon, and Lyle, all 5 of them, waiting for me. Healthy, unharmed. It had all been a lie. "What is this?" I asked, my voice shaking with confusion and growing anger. "Gerald, are you okay?" Bethany said there was an accident, that you needed surgery. Vernon stood up. "There's no emergency, Doris. We needed to get you here, and we knew you wouldn't come otherwise." The betrayal hit me like a physical blow. They had used my love for my son as a weapon. They had terrified me, made me think Gerald was dying, just to get me to this hospital. "Now that you're here," Vernon continued, pulling papers out of a briefcase, "we need to settle this situation." The papers were property transfer documents. They'd already filled everything out. My name, my address, the legal description of my house. All that was missing was my signature. Vernon spread them across the small table in the waiting room like he was conducting a business meeting. Lyle looked at me with barely concealed contempt. "We've been evicted," he said flatly. "We have nowhere to go." Glenda started crying. "We've been living in our car for 3 days, Doris." 3 days. Do you know what that's like? I knew it was a lie. My neighbor had seen Vernon's car parked at their apartment building just yesterday. But they were committed to this story. Gerald can't focus on his career when he's worrying about my family. It's affecting his work. He might lose his job. She grabbed Gerald's hand. "If you love him, if you really love your son, you'll do this." Gerald finally looked at me. "Mom, please, just sign the papers. We're not asking you to leave. You can stay in 1 bedroom. We'll take care of everything. You can just relax." That's when I understood. They didn't want to live with me. They wanted my house. They wanted control. I would be a guest, maybe even an unpaid caretaker, in the home I'd spent 15 years paying for. Vernon must have seen the realization on my face, because he pressed harder. "It's the right thing to do, Doris, the Christian thing." I looked at each of their faces. Vernon's was hard and demanding. Glenda's was manipulative, fake tears still running down her cheeks. Lyle looked impatient, like I was wasting his time. Bethany looked triumphant, like she'd already won. Then I looked at Gerald. My son, the little boy I'd rocked to sleep, the teenager I'd helped with homework, the young man I'd been so proud to see graduate. I searched his face for any sign of the person I'd raised, any sign of love, or guilt, or conflict. There was nothing. Just cold determination. That's when something snapped inside me. I'd been raised to be polite, to avoid confrontation, to keep the peace. But standing in that hospital waiting room at almost 3 a.m, looking at the papers they expected me to sign, I felt a strength I didn't know I had. I stood up straight. My voice came out shaky at first but grew stronger. "No." "The answer is no." Bethany's face contorted. She started screaming. "You hate me. You've always hated me. You never wanted Gerald to be happy." Other people in the waiting room were starting to stare. Gerald stood up, his face red with anger. His voice when he spoke was so loud it echoed. "Where will my wife's family live? Mom, where will they live? You have a house. They don't. How is that fair?" Vernon grabbed my arm. His grip was tight, too tight. "You're not leaving until you sign these papers, Doris." I tried to pull away, but he held on. "Let go of me," I said. He tightened his grip. That's when a security guard who'd been watching the situation approached. "Sir, you need to let go of the lady." Vernon reluctantly released my arm. The guard looked at me. "Mom, are you okay? Do you know these people?" I said yes. They were family, but I needed to leave. He walked me to my car, and I could feel all 5 of them staring daggers into my back. I sat in my car in the hospital parking lot as the sun started to rise. My entire body was shaking. My son had lied to me, had used my love as a weapon, had let his wife's family terrorize me and had actively participated. The Gerald I knew was gone. Maybe had never existed. Maybe I'd just been seeing what I wanted to see. I drove home, locked all my doors, checked every window, and cried until I had no tears left. The next morning, there was a knock on my door. I looked through the peephole, expecting to see them coming to harass me again. Instead, it was my neighbor Frank. He was a retired police officer, a widower around 60, and we'd always had a friendly relationship. He held up his hands when he saw me peeking through. "Doris, it's just me. Can we talk?" I opened the door cautiously. Frank looked concerned. "I've been hearing things through the church grapevine about what's been happening to you. I want you to know something. What they're doing to you. What your son and his in-laws are doing. It has a name. It's called elder abuse. Financial exploitation, combined with emotional manipulation." He explained that he'd seen this pattern before in his years on the force. Family members pressuring elderly relatives to sign over property or assets, isolating them from support systems, using guilt and fear as weapons. "You're only 53, he said. "So, maybe you don't think of yourself as elderly, but in the eyes of the law, what they're doing could be prosecuted. At the very least, you need to protect yourself legally." He gave me the name of his daughter, Judith, who was an estate attorney. "Call her," he said. "Tell her I sent you. She'll help." That conversation was the first time in weeks that I felt like maybe I wasn't crazy. Maybe I wasn't the bad guy. Maybe I had the right to say no. 1 week after the hospital incident, a certified letter arrived. I had to sign for it. My hands were shaking as I opened the envelope. It was from a law office I'd never heard of, representing Gerald Fletcher and Bethany Fletcher. My heart sank as I read. The letter claimed that I had verbally promised my house to them. It alleged that I was experiencing mental decline and that they were concerned about my ability to care for myself and my property. It suggested that I was no longer competent to live alone. And then came the threat. They were prepared to initiate guardianship proceedings if necessary, to protect my well-being and ensure the property was properly maintained. I read the letter 3 times, and each time the words became more terrifying. Could they actually do this? Could they take my house and my independence? Could they have me declared incompetent? I didn't know anything about law. I couldn't afford an attorney. I just sat in my house with the curtains drawn, feeling the walls closing in. On the 3rd day, Frank noticed my mail piling up in the box. He knocked, and when I didn't answer, he kept knocking. Finally, I opened the door. I must have looked terrible because his face filled with concern. "Doris, what happened?" I showed him the letter. I watched him read it, his jaw getting tighter with each paragraph. When he finished, he pulled out his phone. "I'm calling Judith right now. This is intimidation. And it's wrong." His daughter Judith arrived at my house that evening. Judith was in her early 40s, sharp-eyed and no nonsense. She read the letter carefully while I sat on my couch wringing my hands. When she finished, she looked up at me. "This is a scare tactic, and it's bullshit. Pardon my language." Relief flooded through me so powerfully, I almost started crying. She explained that guardianship requires actual medical evidence of incompetence. "You're clearly competent. You're coherent. You manage your own affairs. You understand what's happening. A verbal promise, even if you'd made one which you didn't, isn't binding for property transfer. This letter is meant to terrify you into complying." Judith offered to represent me at a friends and family rate, something I could actually afford. She drafted a cease and desist letter to the attorney representing Gerald and Bethany. In it, she clearly stated that I had made no promises regarding my property, that I was fully competent, that any further harassment would be met with legal action, and that all communication should go through her office from now on. Sending that letter felt like taking back a tiny bit of control. 3 days later, I was in my kitchen making tea when I heard a noise at the back door. It was the middle of the afternoon, bright daylight. I went to investigate and nearly screamed. Lyle was on my back porch with a toolbox, trying to remove the hinges from my door. He had actually started unscrewing them. "What are you doing?" I yelled through the door. He looked up, not even ashamed. "Gerald gave me permission. This is going to be my room, so I'm just getting started on moving in." I ran to the phone and called 911. "There's a man trying to break into my house," I said, my voice shaking. The dispatcher kept me on the line while police were dispatched. When Lyle heard me say police, he grabbed his toolbox and ran. He was gone by the time the sirens arrived, but the damage to my door hinges was obvious. The officers took a report. They said they'd go talk to Lyle. When they came back an hour later, they told me Head claimed it was all a misunderstanding. He said he was checking on his elderly mother-in-law who wasn't answering her phone and wanted to make sure she was okay. He said the tools were to fix a loose hinge Head noticed, not to break in. The officers could see I was upset, but without witnesses and with Lyle's counterstory, there wasn't much they could do beyond documenting it. One officer, a woman about my age, told me quietly, "Mom, you need to get a restraining order. This situation is escalating. Document everything. Take photos. Save every text and email, and consider a security system if you can afford it." I thanked her and called Judith immediately after they left. That night, my phone rang. "Gerald." I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. "You called the cops on Lyle." His voice was pure fury. "Are you insane? He was trying to help you." I tried to explain that Lyle was literally breaking into my house, that Gerald had no right to give anyone permission to enter my property. Gerald talked over me. "You're being paranoid and dramatic? This is ridiculous." Then his tone shifted. "We need to have a family meeting. With a mediator. A professional who can help us work through this reasonably. Will you at least agree to that?" I was so tired of fighting. Maybe a neutral third party could make them see reason. "Fine," I said. "But I'm bringing my attorney." There was a pause. "If you feel like you need a lawyer for a family meeting, that says everything about you." "Mom." He hung up. I called Judith and told her what had happened. She said she'd absolutely attend the mediation. Frank also offered to come as a witness, as did Irene. We spent the next several days preparing. Judith helped me document everything. Dates and details of every incident. Screenshots of social media posts. The police report from Lyle's break-in attempt. Copies of my mortgage documents, my deed, my will. Photographs of the damage to my door. The meeting was scheduled for the following Tuesday at the community center. As the date approached, I felt sick with anxiety. Part of me hoped this would finally be the moment Gerald woke up and saw what was happening. Part of me knew it was just going to be another attack. Tuesday morning arrived gray and cold. Judith picked me up because I was shaking too badly to drive. We arrived at the community center to find a small meeting room set up with a large table and chairs. The mediator was already there. A woman named Barbara, who introduced herself with a warm smile. Gerald, Bethany, Vernon, Glenda, and Lyle filed in together. They'd also brought their attorney, a slick-looking man in an expensive suit, and they'd brought one more person, a man I didn't recognize who was introduced as a family friend. Barbara began the session by explaining the mediation process, but within minutes, it became clear she'd already been fed their version of events. She kept using phrases like finding a compromise for the housing situation and helping the family reach an agreement about living arrangements. I interrupted. "There is no housing situation. There's a situation where they want to take my house." Bethany immediately burst into tears. It looked rehearsed. "See," she sobbed. "She won't even try to work with us." The attorney representing Gerald and Bethany then presented what he called evidence. He had text messages I'd sent, but they'd been taken completely out of context. One from 2 years ago said, "You're always welcome in my home." He claimed this was a promise that they could move in. Another text said, "I want you to be happy." He argued this showed Id agreed to do whatever it took to make them happy, including transferring property. He even brought up my wedding speech where Id said, "Mi casa es su casa," a common saying, and claimed it was a legally binding promise. Then came the character assassination. Vernon testified first. He said I was forgetful and confused. He brought up a time 2 years ago when Id accidentally left the stove on after making dinner. He made it sound like it happened regularly when it had happened once. Glenda claimed I asked the same questions repeatedly and couldn't remember conversations we'd had. It was all lies, but she said it so convincingly. Bethany testified that I often didn't remember things we'd discussed, that she was worried about my mental state, that I was becoming a danger to myself. Then the family friend was introduced as a licensed therapist named Marcus. Had never met me, never examined me, never spoken to me. But he gave what he called a professional opinion. Based on the family's reports, He said I was showing signs of early dementia. He suggested I needed supervised living and that the best option would be family care in a familiar environment, meaning my house with them in control. I sat there feeling like I was in a nightmare. They were systematically destroying my reputation, my competency, and my autonomy. Judith had enough. She stood up abruptly. "Excuse me, but I need to interrupt this circus." She demanded the therapist's credentials and license number. She pointed out that what had just done, offering a diagnosis without ever examining the patient, was a massive ethical violation. She threatened to report him to the state licensing board. The therapist's confident demeanor crumbled. He backpedaled quickly. "I was just expressing concern as a friend of the family. I wasn't making an official diagnosis." Barbara, the mediator, was starting to look uncomfortable. Judith then asked if I could speak. She had me tell my side of the story, the full truth. I explained how I'd worked 2 jobs for 15 years to buy my house. I described the escalating demands from Bethany's family. I showed the police report from Lyle's break-in attempt. I read text messages from Gerald demanding I hand over the house. My voice shook, but I got through it. When I finished, the room was quiet. Barbara's expression had completely changed. She was looking at Gerald and his group with suspicion now. She asked Gerald directly, "Did your mother ever explicitly promise to give you her house?" Gerald stammered. He couldn't give a straight answer. He talked around it, said things like she implied and family should help family. But he couldn't say yes. Then I did something I'd been too afraid to do. I looked my son in the eye and asked, "Gerald, when did I become someone for you to rob?" The room went silent. Gerald's face turned red, and then he exploded. "Where will my wife's family live?" he shouted, slamming his hand on the table. "Mom, where will they live? You have a house, a whole house. They don't have anything. How is that fair?" His voice got louder. "You're old. You'll die soon anyway. Why not give the house now, when it can actually help people?" The moment those words came out of his mouth, time seemed to stop. You could have heard a pin drop. Gerald seemed to realize what had said. His face went pale. Bethany reached for his arm, but he shook her off. I stood up very slowly. I felt completely calm, like I'd moved beyond hurt into some other place entirely. "You just told me you're waiting for me to die so you can have my house. I think we're done here." I picked up my purse and walked toward the door. Judith gathered her papers and followed. On my way out, I heard Vernon start to say something, but Barbara cut him off. "This meeting is over. Don't contact Mrs. Fletcher again." Outside, Judith immediately started making calls. She was filing for restraining orders against all 5 of them. Later that evening, Barbara called Judith. She apologized profusely for the initial bias in the mediation. She said she'd been given a completely false picture of the situation. She told Judith something that made my blood run cold. Bethany's family had a history. Glenda's own mother had fallen for a similar scheme from Glenda and Vernon years ago. The grandmother had signed over her house and then been placed in a nursing home. Vernon had sold the property, and the grandmother had died alone a year later. They'd done this before. I was just their latest target. 1 week after the mediation, I couldn't get out of bed. Gerald's words played on repeat in my mind. "You'll die soon anyway. My only child." The person I'd sacrificed everything for had said he was essentially waiting for me to die so he could have my things. The depression was crushing. I stopped answering the phone. I stopped showering. Mail piled up by the door. I just lay in bed staring at the ceiling, feeling like maybe it would be easier to just give up. On the 3rd day, Frank knocked on my door. When I didn't answer, he knocked louder. Then he called through the mail slot. "Doris, I know you're in there. I'm not leaving until you open this door." I finally dragged myself out of bed and let him in. The look on his face told me how bad I must have looked. He called Judith and Irene immediately. Within an hour, all 3 of them were in my living room. Irene was trying to get me to eat something. Frank was going through my mail. Judith was talking to me about next steps. But I couldn't focus on any of it. Maybe I should just sign the house over, I heard myself say. The room went silent. Irene grabbed my hands. "Doris Fletcher, don't you dare." That's the depression talking. That's them winning. But I just felt so tired. "Has my son. Has all I have." Irene's voice was firm. He stopped being your son when he chose their greed over your well-being. You have us. You have people who actually care about you. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I was completely alone. That night, Frank insisted I wasn't staying in the house by myself. He stayed in my guest room. Around 2 in the morning, I woke up feeling dizzy and wrong. I tried to stand and collapsed. Frank heard the thump and came running. The next thing I knew, I was in an ambulance. At the hospital, they told me my blood pressure was dangerously high. I was dehydrated and malnourished. The doctor said the stress was literally killing me. They kept me overnight for observation. Frank stayed in a chair next to my bed the entire time. Pastor Reynolds came to visit me in the hospital. He sat by my bed and took my hand. "Doris, I owe you an apology. The whole church owes you an apology. The truth has come out." He explained that Barbara, the mediator, attended our church. After what Shed witnessed at the mediation, Shed felt compelled to share what had really been happening. Not details, but enough for people to understand that I'd been the victim, not the villain. The congregation was horrified. They'd been manipulated just like I had. When I was released from the hospital, something unexpected happened. Church members started showing up at my house. They brought casseroles and groceries. They offered help with yard work. They sat with me and listened. Many shared their own stories of family betrayal and manipulation. An elderly woman named Pearl told me Shed signed over her house to her son 15 years ago. Now she lived in a nursing home that smelled like disinfectant and sadness. Her son had sold the house within a month. He never visited her. "Don't make my mistake, Doris," she said, squeezing my hand with her papery fingers. "Don't give up your security for people who don't cherish you." Gerald's former best friend, a man named Curtis, showed up at my door one afternoon. He and Gerald had been inseparable growing up, but I hadn't seen him in over a year. "Mrs. Fletcher," he said, "I need to tell you something. I haven't spoken to Gerald in months. Bethany doesn't like me. She said I was a bad influence, that I didn't support their marriage. Anyone who questioned anything about their relationship got cut off." Curtis looked sad. "I tried to warn Gerald that her family was using him, that they were isolating him from everyone who cared about him. He told me I was jealous and to stay out of his life." Curtis' words were hard to hear, but important. "Your son is in a toxic situation," he said carefully. "But Mrs. Fletcher, he's an adult, has making his own choices. You can't save someone who doesn't want to be saved." That truth hurt, but I needed to hear it. While Judith was helping me organize paperwork one afternoon, she found something that made her face go pale. There was a record that someone had requested information about my life insurance policy, and the request had been sent to Bethany's email address. They'd been checking on how much my life insurance was worth. Judith also discovered that someone had accessed my will, which I kept with my important papers in a file cabinet in my den. The realization was horrifying. They weren't just after the house for now. They'd been doing calculations. House value plus life insurance. Gerald's comment about me dying soon took on a darker, more sinister meaning. Were they just waiting for me to die naturally, or was I potentially in danger? Judith didn't say it out loud, but I could see the concern in her eyes. That afternoon, she helped me change everything. New will, with a completely different beneficiary. Life insurance changed to name a charity. Everything documented and filed properly. Something fundamental shifted in me that day. The grief and guilt that had been weighing me down transformed into something harder. My maternal instinct, the part of me that had always protected Gerald no matter what, finally died. In its place, my survival instinct took over. I filed restraining orders against all 5 of them. I hired a company to install security cameras around my entire property. I changed all my locks and added deadbolts. I opened a new bank account and moved my money. I made copies of every important document and gave them to Judith for safekeeping. I wasn't going to be a victim anymore. Gerald and Bethany's group must have gotten wind of the will changes through legal gossip or maybe someone at the bank. 2 weeks after Eid changed everything, they showed up at my house. All 5 of them. It was a Saturday morning, and they came right up to my door despite the restraining orders. They started shouting in my front yard. My neighbors heard immediately. Mrs. Chen from next door called the police right away. Frank came out of his house and stood on my porch like a guard dog. Vernon was yelling threats from my driveway. "You'll regret this, Doris. We'll sue you for everything. Elder abuse, neglect. Well, make sure everyone knows what kind of person you are." Glenda was right there with him. "We treated you like family, and this is how you repay us." Bethany was on my front lawn, literally sobbing, a full dramatic performance for any neighbors watching. Lyle had his phone out and was filming everything for social media, and Gerald just stood at the back of the group, not saying anything, letting them do his dirty work. I heard sirens approaching. I walked out onto my porch. Frank and Irene were flanking me. I felt strong standing between them. When the police officers got out of their cars, I spoke clearly and calmly. "I have restraining orders against these 5 people. They're violating those orders by being on my property. They've been trying to coerce me into giving them my house. They've broken into my property. They've threatened and harassed me." My voice didn't shake. I wasn't scared anymore. I was done. The officers recognized the situation immediately. One of them, a younger officer, told me later that his own grandmother was facing similar pressure from family members. He knew exactly what this was. All 5 of them were arrested for violating restraining orders. Vernon tried to argue, then tried to resist, which got him additional charges. I watched as they put handcuffs on Gerald. He looked at me then, really looked at me. And for just a second I saw something that might have been shame, but then he looked away. And whatever moment that had been passed. At the police station, Judith showed up with months of documentation, text messages, emails, social media posts, a recording of the mediation session, which was legal in our state since all parties had been informed of the recording at the beginning, the police report from Lyle's break-in attempt, my medical records showing the stress-related hospitalization, the paper trail of the life insurance inquiry, everything laid out in perfect order. The officers were shocked by the scope of it. The prosecutor filed multiple charges: elder abuse, attempted fraud, breaking and entering for Lyle, harassment. The judge set bail high, especially for Vernon and Gerald, calling their behavior predatory and dangerous. Bethany's family was bailed out within hours by Glenda's sister from out of state, but Gerald sat in jail for 3 days. Bethany didn't bail him out right away. When she finally did, Gerald looked like a different person. Broken, tired, but he still didn't apologize. He still blamed me. The preliminary hearings were hard to sit through. Their lawyer tried to negotiate a plea deal. He offered a public apology in the newspaper in exchange for dropping the most serious charges. Judith looked at me for guidance. I thought about it for a long time. Part of me wanted to spare Gerald a criminal record, but the stronger part of me knew that they needed real consequences, or they'd just try this again with someone else. "No deal," I said. "They need to face what they've done." The pressure of the legal proceedings started breaking apart their alliance. Gerald began blaming Bethany's family for giving him bad advice. Bethany blamed Gerald for not being able to control his mother. Vernon blamed everyone for not being more convincing. Their unity crumbled when real consequences appeared. Their lawyer eventually withdrew from the case, citing ethical concerns about continuing to represent them. Facing serious charges and potential jail time, they finally accepted a settlement: permanent, no-contact restraining orders against all 5 of them. A formal written apology to be published in the Springfield Tribune newspaper. Gerald had to sign documents forfeiting any claims to my estate or property. Mandatory counseling for Gerald if he ever wanted the possibility of future supervised contact. 200 hours of community service each at the local elder care center. Financial restitution for my legal fees and the costs of the security system. The newspaper apology ran on a Saturday. It was a full quarter-page ad with all 5 of their names. It admitted to attempted manipulation and exploitation. It apologized specifically to me, Doris Fletcher, by name. It included a warning to the community about the reality of elder abuse. My vindication was complete and public. Everyone who'd doubted me, everyone who'd believed their lies, saw the truth in black and white. 3 months after the settlement, my phone rang from a number I didn't recognize. It was a therapist's office facilitating a supervised call from Gerald. This was part of his required counseling. I almost didn't accept it. But curiosity won out. When Gerald's voice came through the line, he sounded small and far away. "Mom, I don't know what happened to me." He started trying to explain, making excuses. He blamed Bethany. He blamed stress. He blamed everyone and everything except himself. I listened until he ran out of words. Then I spoke. Gerald, you chose this. Every single step of the way, you made choices. You chose to value a house over your mother. You chose to participate in lies and manipulation. You chose to stand by while they terrorized me. You chose to say you were waiting for me to die. I heard him start to cry. I love you, I said, and I meant it. But I don't trust you. I can't trust you. And I won't risk my safety or my peace for someone who sees me as an obstacle to an inheritance. If you ever become the man I raised, if you ever do the work to understand what you did and why it was wrong, you can call me again. I continued. But until then, I need you to stay out of my life. Goodbye, Gerald. I hung up the phone. Irene, who was sitting with me, asked if I was okay. I thought about it. Yes, I said, surprised to realize it was true. Yes, I'm okay. 6 months after the court settlement, my life looked completely different. I was still in my house, the house I'd worked so hard for, and it finally felt peaceful again. Gerald and Bethany had divorced. I heard through Curtis that Bethany's family had turned on Gerald, blaming him for the failure of their scheme. Gerald had moved to another state to start over. He sent occasional emails, usually around holidays, carefully worded and distant. I read them but rarely responded. That chapter of my life was closed. I started going to therapy to work through the trauma of betrayal. My therapist helped me understand that what I'd experienced was a specific type of abuse, and that my feelings of grief and anger were completely valid. She helped me separate the Gerald I'd raised from the man had become, and to mourn that loss properly. Through therapy, I also found a support group for survivors of elder abuse. The stories I heard there were heartbreaking. So many families destroyed by greed. So many elderly people who'd lost everything because they couldn't say no to their children or grandchildren. I started speaking at the support group, sharing my story, helping others recognize the warning signs. I talked about manipulation tactics, about how abusers isolate their victims, about why it's not selfish to protect what you've worked for. I found purpose in helping others navigate what I'd been through. The local community center asked me to give talks about protecting seniors from financial exploitation. I said yes. My new family looked nothing like my old one. And that was okay. Frank became my closest friend. We had dinner together several times a week. Sometimes at my house, sometimes at his. It was companionship without pressure. Friendship without agenda. Irene and her family included me in holidays and celebrations. The young couple next door, Teresa and Vincent, treated me like an honorary grandmother. Their 2 little kids started calling me Grandma Doris, and when they said it, my heart felt full in a way it hadn't in years. The church community embraced me fully once they understood the truth. I joined the women's Bible study group and found genuine friendships there. People showed up not because they wanted something from me, but because they enjoyed my company. I was invited to birthday parties and baby showers and graduations. I was part of a community. For the first time since my husband died, I didn't feel alone. Forgiveness was a process, not an event. I'd be lying if I said I forgave Gerald immediately or easily. There were days I was still angry, days I cried for the relationship we'd had and lost, days I missed my son so badly it physically hurt. But my therapist helped me understand that forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. It doesn't mean letting someone back into your life. It doesn't mean saying what they did was okay. Forgiveness, for me, meant choosing peace over holding on to anger. It meant accepting that Gerald made his choices and I made mine. It meant moving forward. The wisdom I gained from this nightmare became principles I lived by and shared with others. Blood doesn't guarantee loyalty, I learned. Family is about how people treat you, not about shared DNA. Your home is your security, and you should never gamble with it, no matter who's asking. Manipulation disguised as family duty is still manipulation. Standing firm isn't selfish, it's survival. Real family shows up without conditions, without demands, without ulterior motives. I updated my will one final time with complete clarity. My house would be left to the local women's shelter, a place that helped people escape dangerous situations and rebuild their lives. My life insurance was split between cancer research in memory of my late husband and a nonprofit focused on elder abuse prevention. My personal belongings were divided among Frank, Irene, and a few other close friends. I wrote a detailed letter explaining everything that had happened with Gerald and his attempts to take my property. The letter was sealed with my will to protect against any future contests. I started a blog. I called it Silver Boundaries, focusing on elder rights and setting healthy limits with family members. At first, I shared my story anonymously, testing the waters. The response was overwhelming. Thousands of people reached out with similar stories, adult children demanding parents take out reverse mortgages to fund their businesses, grandchildren pressuring grandparents to co-sign loans they'd never be able to repay, families moving in and taking over, leaving elderly relatives as servants in their own homes. I realized my story wasn't unique. It was epidemic. Eventually, I decided to go public with my identity. A local news station did a feature on elder abuse and asked to interview me. I agreed. The segment went viral online. I received hundreds of messages from people thanking me for speaking up, for showing them they had the right to say no. I was asked to testify before the state legislature about proposed elder protection laws. Standing in that chamber, telling my story to lawmakers, I felt like all the pain had been transformed into something meaningful. The redemption wasn't Gerald's. At least, not yet. Maybe someday he'd do the hard work of understanding what he'd done and why it was wrong. Maybe someday he'd offer a genuine apology without excuses, but I didn't wait for that maybe. I built a beautiful life in the meantime. I redeemed my own story by turning trauma into advocacy, pain into purpose, isolation into community. 1 year after the final confrontation, I sat on my front porch on a warm spring evening. Frank was bringing over dinner, something head grilled. Doris's kids were playing in my yard, their laughter floating through the air. My church friends were coming over later for our weekly Bible study. My house, my hard-earned house, was filled with the sound of genuine love and friendship. Just people who valued me for who I was, not what I owned. I thought about the journey. I'd spent 30 years raising Gerald alone. I'd sacrificed sleep and comfort and my own needs to give him a good life. I'd worked myself to exhaustion to provide opportunities for him. And when he demanded I sacrifice my security, my home, my peace for his greed and his wife's family's entitlement, I'd finally said no. That no had saved my life. That no had set me free. I'm 54 now. I'm surrounded by people who love me without agenda. My house is still mine. My peace is still mine. My future is still mine. I wake up every morning in my own bed, in my own home, without fear. I make my own decisions. I set my own boundaries. I choose who gets to be in my life. And that choice, that power to choose, is everything. If you're listening to this and facing pressure from family to give up something you've worked for, please hear me. You're not selfish for protecting your security. You're not cruel for setting boundaries. You're not a bad parent or grandparent or aunt or uncle for saying no. If your family demands you give up what you need to survive, they're not acting like family. Love doesn't come with financial conditions. Real family lifts you up. They don't tear you down for their own gain. Your elder years should be peaceful, not battlegrounds. You've worked your whole life. You've earned your rest, your security, your autonomy. Don't let anyone guilt you into giving that away. Stand firm. Speak your truth. Build boundaries that protect your well-being. And find your real family, the ones who show up without asking what you can give them first. Maybe someday Gerald will change. Maybe therapy will help him see clearly. Maybe hell do the work to become someone I could trust again. Maybe hell offer an apology that comes from genuine understanding rather than wanting something from me. If that day comes, it will be a gift. But I don't live my life waiting for maybe. I built something beautiful in the meantime. If reconciliation happens, it will be a bonus, not a necessity. My son yelled. Where will my wife's family live? When I refused to give them my house. I answered with my life. Not in my house, not on my sacrifice, not at the cost of everything I worked for. And in that answer, in that firm boundary, I found myself again. Sometimes the family you choose loves you better than the family you raised. Sometimes saying no is the most loving thing you can do for yourself. I'm at peace now. I'm safe. I'm home. And that's enough. That's more than enough. That's everything. Now I want to hear from you. Have you ever had to set firm boundaries with family members who demanded too much? Have you ever felt guilty for saying no to someone you love? Drop your story in the comments below. Your experience might help someone else facing the same struggle. And if this story resonated with you, hit that like button. Subscribe to this channel so you don't miss more real-life stories about standing up for yourself and finding your strength. Share this video with someone who needs to hear that it's okay to protect what's theirs. Thank you so much for listening to my story. I hope it gives you courage if you're facing something similar. Remember, you deserve peace. You deserve security. You deserve respect. May you find the strength to stand firm when you need it most, and may you surround yourself with people who love you for who you are, not what you have. Take care of yourselves out there. Stay strong, set boundaries, and never apologize for protecting your well-being.